Guys, here is something that you can add on to your meditations if you are doing future projections. And what I mean by that is if you're imagining or embodying yourself in a future winning state, usually we're imagining how we look, how we feel, maybe even the people around us, the environment. But one thing that you can do in that moment is also ask yourself, how am I breathing as this person? Breath is spirit. That's what inspire means. Like inspire, you're bringing in spirit. And the etymology of spirit actually means breath. And spirar is what it actually means. Spirar, to blow. So spirit, as you guys may have known, transcends linear time, right? So it's omnipotent, omnipresent, omniscient. And when you imagine the breath in that moment, you can transcend that time. And then you, as this future self, can be breathing that breath, that spirit into yourself. And you can learn how to be that person first with the breath. We are inspired. That's where all action comes from. It comes from inspiration, in spirit of self. So I'm taking questions on mindset, having to do with anything, trauma, being your best self, goal setting. Here's something interesting just to get the ball rolling here. Savoring. So savoring would be looking at, remembering the good moments of your life. Savoring actually helps us to mitigate the damages of a negative bias. So humans have a negative bias. Most of us inherently know that we're biased to notice the negative. We're biased to notice what is wrong with things. And so we're always noticing that if somebody's speaking to us, we actually hear a lot more good things than bad things. As humans, we, in general, all experience more good things than we do bad things. But our experience that we relate to, like, that's actually more real than the experience that we're in. The relationship that we have to that experience is always going to be oriented towards the negative because our body is doing that. Our body is biased to keep us alive, which means it's going to be noticing threats more than it's going to be noticing positive rememberings, positive images. And so we get to practice. I mean, the negative bias that we have is very, very useful in a forest or in a desert, 3 days walk from the nearest village. It's going to be very, very useful for you to notice animal prints and to coordinate all of your focus towards this negative aspect of reality and figure out how to stay alive in that scenario. However, nowadays, most of us are in houses. We're in temperature controlled rooms. We've got refrigerators with food. We have stores within a few miles from our houses that we can go get more food. And so a lot of the negative bias that we experience now isn't saving our life, and it's more of just being a distraction for us to transcend that to our greatest version of self. So just like we're not exercising naturally, right? We're not building our own houses. We're not walking 15 miles a day just to live. We're not carrying things. We're not sitting down on the ground and standing up. We're not laying down on the hard ground. We're not doing these things. We're not climbing up the mountain to seek advice from the elder or the oracles. We're not fighting over food, over mates. We don't have animals hunting us. So We don't need it. And in those scenarios, we would have massive appreciation for good things. Do you guys see that? If we are in an environment where there's a lot of negative events, like we just got done outrunning a wild boar who was trying to stab us with its tusks because we accidentally walked into its territory, and we get back to the village, we would appreciate the dinner that's prepared for us. We would appreciate the relationships. We would appreciate seeing our father, our mother, our kids, our loved ones. There would be a lot more context where that negative bias that keeps you alive would be outweighed, because you would experience very, very dramatic lows all the time. And then the highs, which aren't so dramatic, just seeing safety, seeing a teepee, seeing shelter, seeing these things would give you a tremendous amount of gratification, a tremendous amount of joy, because you're experiencing tremendous lows. Nowadays, we're not experiencing tremendous lows. Some of us literally get offended by words. Okay, our bodies are made to be outrunning things that are trying to kill us all the time. And we take that same sense that we would apply to that scenario, and we apply it to some stranger on the internet said something that offended me. And that's not a real low, okay? And because we're not actually experiencing our best friend dying because he actually did get caught by the boar, and so then we go and we feel grateful that we're back at camp, we're just experiencing these like minor lows. When we experience highs, tremendous positivity, we don't have the context to appreciate them. This is a very long-winded way of saying that we're in an unnatural environment, which for the most part, we don't really get taught that, right? We get born into this environment, and we get programmed in school on how to act, what to do, what you should do, when to ask permission, when you're out of line, when you should feel guilty. We get programmed all of this stuff, and we don't really get taught so much about evolutionary biology in coordination with our modern life, and how we can essentially optimize the human being so that we have an amazing life. Now, one of those ways is going to a gym. So in almost every single city and across the entire planet, there's a place where you can go exercise if you're not naturally doing that. So you go to this facility to exercise. Why? Because you're not running and jumping and blah, 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 all the stuff that I said that we're not doing anymore. So we go to this gym to exercise. That's a start, right? What else is happening? We're creating things like saunas, right? And we're experiencing temperature fluctuations, which are natural for the body to go through. And the body does a whole bunch of processes when it's hot that are natural, and we're missing if we're not doing it. So there's things like saunas, which extends people's lives because they go through these processes. There's things like cold plunges. I've been doing ice baths for 20 years. I don't know, since I played hockey in around 2000 era. And what else is there? We're learning how to fast. This is something that has been in every single religion and philosophy. And in countless religious texts, you see this story of a 40 days with no food or water. 40 days and nights with no food and water. And then he arises out of the desert and all of the miracles happening. This would be natural. In the summertime, very little things grow. In the wintertime, very little things grow. So you could be a good hunter, you could be a good forager, but there would still be times of the year where food and or water wouldn't be available. So what do we do now? We make our body, we practice the fast, because in the wintertime, in these seasons of extreme hot or extreme cold, where we didn't have food, the body would utilize fat for energy, and all the eating season, it was storing stem cells that are produced by your kidneys and liver. It's storing, and bone marrow, it's storing those stem cells in your fat, because at the time where you're resting because there's not very much to do because there's no food, like the winter time when the days are shorter, you're sleeping a lot, your body's accessing fat for energy, and voila, there's a stem cell. So what have I listed here? Exercise is a practice to help us naturally move in ways that we would move before. Sauna and cold plunge is a way for us to practice temperature variations that we're not receiving because everyone has a thermometer set in their car, in their workplace, in their home at 72 degrees. We're practicing not eating because we're in a perpetual state of spring/early summertime where we've got an abundance of animal products, fruits, vegetables, algae, anything we can think of that we can consume is available to us. So we have to practice these things. Now, going back about 15 minutes ago, I started talking about mindset, highs and lows, and how we're not experiencing tremendous lows all the time. And then we're not appreciating the good parts of life because we don't have these fluctuations. Just like temperatures aren't fluctuating, the highs and lows in our lives are not fluctuating. Everything's relatively just kind of like flat-ish compared to what this body, what this psyche is designed for. And I'm speaking from personal reference of people that are blessed enough right now to be listening to me at 12 o'clock, the middle of the day, Pacific time. At least it could be not the middle of the day somewhere else in the world, but the middle of the day on a Wednesday on their device. So I'm speaking to a very privileged class of the world. I think less than 1 billion people have smartphone. That statistic's probably really old, but less than 1 billion people, the time I last checked, had a smart device, and there was like 6 or 7 billion people. So they say, I don't know if those figures are accurate, but that's like 15% of the people actually have an ability to see this live. So we're all right now privileged. We're probably living in this zone where we're not experiencing highs and lows, which means that we're making up negative situations. We're getting scared about things that are not really that life-threatening. We're getting angry about things that don't really matter. When we go and experience positive events, we're not seeing the contrast between the negative event because it's almost the same. It's almost the same that we get to go in a car and drive 100 miles an hour and get 300 miles in 3 hours. It's not that cool compared to the negative aspects of our life, which was like, I dropped my phone on the ground and broke the screen, right? So instead of my best friend just got mauled by a wild pig, it's I dropped my phone on the ground and broke my screen. Why am I saying all this? Just to point out that we practice exercise, we practice fasting, we practice sauna, we practice ice bath. We also need to practice the mental stuff. We can take ourselves through exercises to bring us back to our natural state so that we can recognize negatives for what they are and recognize positives for what they are. Because right now, everything's a little bit confused. We're recognizing negatives as if they're actually negative, like biologically negative, and we're seeing positives and being like, meh, what's that called? Hedonic? It's like the opposite of bias, hedonic negative bias, something like that, where we will never, ever get used to negative things happening to us. We'll never get used to it. So if we have to go to a job that we hate, we will always hate it. Always. We will always hate it. We won't really get used to it. Positive things we get used to very, very quickly, like shockingly quickly. So we could work our entire life to become the best in the world at something. We can prove ourselves, win a competition to become that, And then the next day, that feeling that we've been working towards, that good feeling, is gone. Gone. But you take something relatively minor, like I dropped my phone and broke the case, or I scratched my brand new car, we literally will think about that over and over. Or this girl in the mall called me, said my shoes were ugly. We could think about that for years. And if it happens again the next day, it's going to damage us just as much. Again, I'm still getting to my point because I'm not seeing, guys, questions. I like questions. So I wish I knew the name of this principle. Anyways, hedonic bias, I think, is in there. It's like hedonic negative bias from it's a psychological term that I'm not remembering what it is. So what this means is that we get to practice savoring moments. Those that practice savoring moments, the first thing I said on this live, are more resistant to the negative aspects of life. And I would say to pair with that, practicing things that are actually dangerous is going to dilute our response to things that are not dangerous. So if we put ourselves in scenarios that are actually dangerous, when other scenarios like dropping the phone and cracking the screen, or a friend of yours saying they never want to see you again, when these things happen, which can be highly traumatic, and it's definitely highly traumatic nowadays. My statement here is that something like that isn't something that we need to identify with for the rest of our life, which is what people are doing nowadays, because there's nothing else that's really happening worse than that. So that's like the worst thing that's happened for people. So putting ourselves, taking more risks. It doesn't necessarily need to be physical danger. It can be a financial risk. It can be a risk of going for a relationship that the answer yes is not guaranteed. It's like, can we stop only doing things in life that are guaranteed and start taking risk? This also, for male and females, it increases testosterone, which is good for both sexes. This increases our vigor. Our body is feeling like it's fertile. It's increasing the fertility of our physical body and our mind when we are risk averse. And also, young males out there, I don't remember the study because it was 20-ish years ago when I found this, but there's a study where I think it's the European study where they looked at 10,000 women, but I'm not sure. But they tried analyzing for what is the most attractive trait in a male to women. It wasn't broad shoulders. It wasn't clear skin. It wasn't a big, strong ass or back. It wasn't clear eyes. It wasn't full hair. It was avoidance of safety. Avoidance of safety, according to the study that I cannot quote, but I remember 20-ish years ago, avoidance of safety was the most attractive trait to a female in regarding a male. Interesting. I'm not going to make any projections about this. Kettle Buddha is saying, if we only knew these negative things are for us to learn something or will take us to the next step, then we wouldn't see it as negative or conflict, but as growth. Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I'm using the term negative very specifically because negative is the opposite end of the pole of positive. It's an actual term. We have this correlation with negative being something that we shouldn't experience. But nighttime is the negative aspect of the 24-hour cycle that we call a day, right? So nighttime is the negative of the positive part, which is daytime. Female is the negative sex of male. There's a magnet has a negative and a positive end. They're both the same. Negative and positive are literally the same thing, but it's different aspects of the same thing. And so you cannot have positive without negative, which is the whole point of what I'm saying. So in a way, I definitely agree with the statement that you're making, but the actual way that I'm coloring this in is that in life, we're not trying to get rid of the negatives. The more negatives we get rid of and we just start experiencing kind of like gray zone-ish, then we're going to have a gray zone-ish with positives. And so if we can take ourselves into risk and even go into meditations where this might get dark, but we could start going into shadow type meditations where we're bringing up previous traumas that really are buried deep within us and reliving those and experiencing them, and then obviously eventually harmonizing them. But if we're also making up, we're meditating on things like death, we're meditating on things like the people around us dying. Death is the negative aspect of the positive aspect of life. Death, the simplest terms of that is that the physical creation process of the human is over. We're no longer creating physical reality anymore at the moment of death. And then there's something else, which I can philosophize on what that is. But the truth is, none of us really know from personal experience. I don't know, maybe some of us have personal experience that we can tap into through our mind, but this physical body really knows life here. So every single cell in our being is repulsed from death, and we're just taught not to go there, right? But you go into other cultures, so as an American, we're taught that like, no, like the opposite of death is good, no matter what. But you go into other cultures, death is like an actual thing, and they actually do go over and they cross the after death, right? They cross it. You guys know Halloween, Hallows Eve, like this is like All Spirits Day. This is an actual like holiday. It's even like the first of the year in the Norse calendar. Spirits, meaning they were here, now their physical bodies in the ground, and now they're non-physical, and we pay tribute to that. We actually have a lot of reverence for death across the globe. There's even cultures that eat their elders when they graduate. Why am I talking about this? Oh, because meditating on yourself, like, and if you guys have ever had any near-death experiences, you would know that like, okay, it's coming. Like that feeling is one of those lows that I'm suggesting we're missing as a general statement in society. And so we're making big deals about things that come through the TV, right? The TV is satisfying that. That's why it's so addicting for us. And so I'll use this to prove what I'm saying, that our bodies actually need this, which is why we go to movies and we sit down and watch 10 hours on Netflix about somebody else's traumatic life or dramatic life, where people are dying, people are getting cheated, people are getting robbed from. All of that is what? All of that is our body craving that. Craving that. And so me, somebody who's worked in the psychological field my entire life, I'm inviting us to consider maybe we actually, to increase the full spectrumness of our life, could it be that instead of watching the fake traumatic, dramatic stuff on TV, that we just manufacture or practice it in our life? We are manufacturing it to a degree, right? By making things a bigger deal than they are. But what if we actually practice, meaning it's not just random things that we're making mountains out of molehills, but we're actually practicing avoiding safety. Maybe we join a rock climbing gym and we're putting ourselves in what our body will feel like is actually danger, but it's you're falling on a soft pad if you fall off the wall. So I've mentioned a few examples, right? For some of you who actually don't mind avoiding safety, it's doing things like, and I'm just using this as an example. I'll use this as a personal example. For me, it was riding motorcycles with no regard to the speed limit. Again, I'm not condoning this. Just saying. It could be psychologically healthy in certain individuals who are willing to take that step. Fighting a lot, like joining sports where fighting was a thing. This is again, worldwide in cultures, you see fighting going on. Now, normally I'm in the standpoint like Kettle, Buddha, whatever, was saying like, how can we get rid of the negatives? Like normally I'm that, but this whole point of this presentation is the opposite because there is no one answer, right? So for the most part, I would be helping people get over the hurdles of their traumas and their negatives, because that's kind of like mostly where people like are at, where they don't want to introduce more stress and anxiety because they already are, still worrying about the thing that happened to them 26 years ago, which is okay. Like that's where some people are. But now I'm talking to the people that are really just making mountains out of molehills in their own life. And then also having a lack of appreciation because we don't have the contrast of actual negative events. Negative events meaning the events that evoke the emotions of fear, anger, uncomfortableness, confusion. These emotions, I'm saying, are negative, but it doesn't mean they're bad. These are actual healthy, natural emotions that our body needs, just like our body needs to feel hot and cold and starving. And it's okay to be full, have a full stomach, but to have a full stomach in breakfast, at lunch, at the second lunch, at dinner, at the second dinner, and right before bed feels good, definitely feels good. It's comfortable, it's satisfying. Is it great for the evolution of our physical body and our psychological being and our spiritual immortality? There may be alternative ways that we can practice. Hi, is there a top limit as to how many maneuvers I can do in a single day? What happens if I do them for a whole day? So, perfect example of practicing maneuvers, because twisting, turning, standing up, contorting our body is so much more natural than even traditional exercise where we're just moving in like these frontal planes where we're just doing this stuff. So we'd normally be like picking up a rock, climbing up a hill, having to put it down, having to squat down, pick it up, turn, lift, coordinate both sides. Is there a top limit? So you know the answer to that. You know the answer to that. If you guys go to a Human Garage live event, you're doing maneuvers for like 3 to 5 hours. We're doing maneuvers. We're just doing most of them, but there's some talking, there's some resting, there's some learning, and it's a lot. And on those days, I feel amazing. And I just don't do that regularly. Regularly, it's like a shorter practice. But on the days where we actually do the live events, when I'm around touring with Human Garage, it's like we do the hands-on clinic, and sometimes like the group of us, not like basically we wake up at sunrise and do maneuvers. Then we go to these events and do more maneuvers and teach maneuvers. And the body feels awesome. So is there a top limit? My thing is you're probably not reaching it. So the answer probably is yes, but you'll know. You'll know what that is. Think about it, guys. Like there's yoga teachers that do like 8 classes a day and they're doing yoga during that whole time. When I've taught exercise and literally just exercise all day long. Like humans are meant to, like, what if we had to build a house? Like we're not doing it 1 hour a day for, 3 times a week. We're getting up at 5 a.m. and we're working till we basically, there's no light, or 9:30, 11 o'clock at night, we crash, wake up and do it again until the house is built. And then there's some rest time. So it's going to depend on you. All right, Kettle Buddha, if there's no negative or positive, then we have balance. Because is it really positive or negative? Or what is it? We could experience plus sign and negative sign, but only in the mind, isn't it? Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. They're both the same thing. They're both different aspects of the same thing. With that said, we are experiencing this physical reality because of duality. So trying to escape duality is potentially us trying to skip steps. And so I think it's great to go outside of this context of duality and just like everything is. Everything is. That's great. Like as a practice, as a perspective, I'm looking through this window in this period of my life. Do I feel that it grants us a full spectrum human life? Not if we haven't experienced the highs and lows. So for instance, I mentioned motorcycles and fighting. Like I played hockey. Like my favorite part of that was to fight. It was definitely risky. It was extreme focus. I was fighting willing participants. There was anger being released in there as well. And I got picked on a lot when I was in school. So like I got over a lot of feeling like I was less than from getting picked on in middle school and high school because I was the smallest kid in the school. Didn't grow things like armpit hair till I was 19, so I went through puberty really late. So I had these things, and fighting helped me process that and allow me to, at least at the time, feel like I could protect myself, feel like I was powerful. And that was good contrast to getting picked on in school and feeling and being taught and programmed that I wasn't powerful. I no longer need that anymore. I don't have to go through that chapter anymore. And then of course there's lots of highs and lows in that. Sometimes you lose fights and then you're just like have like marks of knuckles in your face and there's pain and there's not being able to sleep at night because you just, your body's in so much pain after full contact sports. And so I'm in the season where it's very easy for me just to go neutral on everything. And I can talk about that for days and days and days and days. If that's all we're doing, though, throughout our life, if we're holding on to that as a dogma, then there likely will be things that come and knock you off your high horse and allow you to look around and be like, oh, I'm actually here on earth as a human to experience this physical life and feel this range of emotional capacity that this body has. And we go through many cycles of this, and that allows us to relate to other people who are in these other feelings. Because if you take the standpoint that we're here learning from each other, if somebody comes to us and saying like, hey, my mom just died yesterday, and like they're trying to talk to you about that, and you're not saying you're like this, but I'm just saying like, and we are in the perspective of everything is grand and everything is heaven and everything is God and your mom, like we're speaking on a different part of the frequency. It makes us ineffective at connecting with others, potentially at a point where and when they need us. And so us going into the different zones of our emotions allows us to match frequency with somebody else, and walk with them as like an amigo, as a friend, as a self, because a lot of the world is experiencing highs and lows right now. And so those of us that are just choosing to be completely non-dual, great, like empower yourself, learn how to be there, but don't forget about the rest of the world. Because in this non-dualism, one of those aspects is we are everything. So everything that's happening in the world, like people's children getting bombed and raped and kidnapped and all of this stuff, like this is us as well. How are we relating to that? Are we just saying like, oh, that's okay? Or are we using emotion to facilitate action to transmute that into a different aspect of the spectrum? These are all just questions. Thank you for asking. Okay, so that's why I loved it last time I ate I ate it on my skateboard. So I had this coach at my gym. His name was Gnarly Charlie. That's what we called him. And this dude was crazy. He was a gymnastics instructor at my gym, and he also taught parkour. And this was like 2011, 10-ish. And this guy was pretty invincible. But the times where like I've visited him in the hospital before because he had a few drinks and he tried doing a flip off of a building and he over rotated and landed on his face into the pavement from on top of a building. And so reconstructive surgery on his face. I think he broke his arm as well. So I visited him in a hospital, you know, with like his jaw wired shut and stuff. But anyways, this stuff would happen to him all the time. And he told me that when he sees his skin broken open, it reminds him that he's human. That gives him this feeling, this connection that he's human. Because sometimes we get into this story that we're this other thing, that, you know, we're this or that. We get into this story. And so I always remember that about him, and every time I hurt myself, it is this smiling energy of like, yes, this body is human. Yeah, Kettle Buddha, they are what they are and serve the purpose. Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing. I think we're in alignment. If something happening for you experience as a negative, but another person experience it as neutral or even positive, is that thing negative really in nature? So this is getting to a more interesting conversation. And I alluded to it earlier that the experiences that we're in are the experience. The experience is neutral. Even the horrible things I mentioned earlier about bombing and stuff, those are neutral events. That's the earth going through its process. You go into nature, you see the same thing. You see trees falling over and crushing animals. You see animals eating other animals. You see like the way that hammerhead sharks reproduce is males have to gang up on and try and separate females away from their tribe of females, and then they gang rape the females, and to the point where like it actually does like some internal damage because males have like barbed penises, and so like that's the way they reproduce though. And so you see these events in nature, and that's one of the things of avoiding the safety of all of this. When you go into nature and you're actually climbing up on rocks that if you fall off you could and you're watching other things fall off, or your friends or yourself fall off, and you're avoiding safety, and you're seeing these events happen, our relationship to them changes. And that's the thing with everything. You know, if somebody has parents that really emphasized like speaking softly, speaking politely, I should say. Like if you have parents that really emphasize speaking politely, and then that kid joins a sport and the coach is yelling at that kid, versus another kid on the team whose parents were yellers. They spoke loud, they were very emotional, maybe there was a lot of people in the family, so the only way to get heard was to speak very loudly. Those two different players could experience the coach's way of speaking, which in fact is neutral. One could experience it even traumatic, because maybe the only time the parent yelled at that kid at the level the coach was a traumatic experience. So it could literally evoke trauma in one person, and it can motivate and charge up another person. And so yes, the thing itself is just a thing. However, the experiences we have with it are, I would even say, more real than the actual experience, because our relationship to it is happening within the self, which is really the only thing, it's the closest thing that we can prove to ourselves that is real. is our thoughts, our actions, how our body feels. That's the closest thing that we have to the I am presence. And most of us aren't ever in the I am presence. So we actually do identify with the body, with our thoughts. We identify with these things. We don't have the sensation of being separate from the body. So when the coach yells at the kid's experiencing the trauma, they're in the trauma, which in the spectrum of positive emotions versus negative emotions, which we can state don't exist, but in that actual spectrum of frequency, because the emotions actually do have frequency, which is measurable, so they do exist. We just label higher frequency feelings as joy and happiness, and lower, you can even, lower tones are going to have different emotions than higher. I can even speak in a higher elevated pitch, and that's going to evoke different feelings in myself and the person who this sound is listening to. So yes, and yes, and yes. Good observations. The negative and positive don't really exist. So here's the thing. In a conversation, if we're speaking about something, it exists. So if we're opened up the table and we're like, okay, this is the parameters that we're speaking from, they exist. But to say like something doesn't exist, we can go there in every single conversation, which again makes you unrelatable. So if we're speaking in this perspective, this window, then just being like, oh, well, they don't exist. Yeah, we can go there. Nothing exists. We know that. It's all just energy vibrating. Like none of this is solid. We think it's solid, but we can just say like, well, nothing exists. Everything is empty and meaningless. We can always go there. It's just pretty non-beneficial to the evolution of the progression of a human if we're just constantly bringing that up to other people that are talking about it's a focus. We're focused in on an aspect of reality, right? We're focused here and we're speaking about traumas versus happiness, and but to just say like, oh, it doesn't exist, like it doesn't really help anything. So I would invite everybody the next time they're just like, well, it doesn't even exist. Time is an illusion. Physical reality is an illusion. Go there, but then bring back a point. Bring back a point of how it's relevant to this focal point. Otherwise, you're going to just be, what's the term? Pouring salt on a lot of conversations, or like the reason why I thought about that is because one time I was at like a party and I was just speaking to my friend and sitting on the floor of a living room, and then all of a sudden this like drum, like this band emerged out of nothing and they just started playing, and then there's like all of these like women, they're all women just dancing around me, and I was completely in the conversation I was having with my buddy, and then there was just all of a sudden people dancing around me, and one of these ladies leaned down and she said, hey, you're kind of salting the dance floor. Like, and I just didn't realize that I was sitting in the middle of their dance floor. And I was like, oh yeah, of course. So I got up and I moved. But if we're always going to like, oh, nothing really exists, it's all an illusion, we're kind of like not allowing the dance of ideas to develop into something that's meaningful and entertaining for the participants around us. And so let's try not to be the one sitting in the middle of the dance floor, interrupting the flow, and be aware of everybody else's fluctuations and dance with them a little bit, even if you don't really agree with it, which I actually learned after like 40 years of life, that like I was always, this is another personal example, I was always like, why should I buy flowers? Maybe it was like 38 years of my life. Why should I buy flowers for my wife or like the other parts of my life, my girlfriends? Like, why would I ever buy a dead plant and bring it to them? Like, it's dumb, it's stupid. Like, that was my own personal philosophy. However, through many decades of living, I saw what it actually means to not all women, but to some women, and especially my now wife. And so I put that personal philosophy that I have about like buying a chopped off flower is like kind of dumb in my own mind. I put that aside so that I can dance in harmony with my wife. And it's just a dance that I would like to take. And so I can look at that as a compromise, or I can look at that as my ability to be multi-dimensional. All right, everybody. I think that is it. There's most of what I was talking about was practicing the psyche, like making the psyche go through experiences just like you would go to a gym and do activities, or just like we do fascial maneuvers to open up the flow and open up the restrictions and dig out stagnation from the body. We do that as practice. We can also practice that within the mind so that we could get to points where, quote, negative things happen to us and we can see them as a neutral event, and or use, just like a dog, the hair stands on the back and then they either fight or flee or freeze. And then once that's resolved, then they go back to their relaxed state. We can utilize the powers that we have inside of ourselves and overcome the obstacles in our life, and then go back to our greatest version of self in a quicker way there, where we're not distracting ourselves and or building more traumas. And those exercises are things that I love to do with people. And so a lot of the times I'll be speaking about them. I actually didn't bring up any. I started to about savoring. So the exercise of the day, I guess, would be to savor, which again, if we're taking a more neutral, non-dual experience in life, we don't notice the negatives, we don't notice the positives. But if we actually are struggling with depression and anxiety and fear, it's likely because we're taking a standpoint of feeling like we're not in control. And a way to practice control is do that on the things about our life that we like. And we all know this when people say, like, keep a gratitude journal or list three things that you're grateful for at the end of the night. What they're actually doing is they're savoring the moments of life, which allows us to realize that we have control on how we feel. When we savor moments, we actually evoke and recognize gratitude, happiness, satisfaction. And then that allows us, when we go into a challenging situations and emotional feelings come up and we're experiencing them, we still have the mechanism of control strong within us. And it takes practice, just like exercise. Guys, I've trained thousands of people, literally thousands, like probably over 10,000 people. And when somebody first starts working out, they cannot feel their muscle flexing. And you hear this question a lot. What is this working? Those of you who are personal trainers know what I'm talking about. What is this working out? And it's like so apparent to the person, like everyone around this person, but if it's their first time, they literally cannot feel their body. Like if they're just doing something like this, bicep curl, which is pretty basic, they mentally don't have the understanding that this is like, whether we take the human garage standpoint of is a hydraulic pump filling with fluid, which is then moving this, they just don't feel it. And you can actually do this by originating the movement in your core. Obviously, I'm not saying this is the only thing that moves it, but a new person who's exercising, they'll be doing lat pull downs or shoulder presses. And what is this working? What is this working? So you have to touch it and be like, here, flex here, and like right here or right here, activate this, or you're touching that, activate this, keep this over here. It's the same thing with our psyche. If we don't practice savoring life, we won't know how to. And we won't know that we have control of how we experience things so that we can get to a more solid, we can even go stoic, if that's the goal, stoic standpoint within the fire of life. And practicing savoring helps us do that. It brings our control back into the self so that when we're in the fire, we realize like, okay, the fire's here now. And when I'm going to do what I need to do to get out of it, and then I'm going to turn it off. Even if that is, I'm going to work every day for 8 hours. And then when I leave, that gets shut down. The replay is going to be posted as soon as I get through like doing the cover photo and everything. So like in an hour. Thank you everybody for joining. Thank you for the comments, and sayonara. Have a good day. Savor something.